Okay, friends, it's good to be in the Word, good to be studying with you. It's been a pretty busy. Summer's over, the clouds covering is, fall is here, got to get the kids back to school, and that's been fun. Of course, it gives me more time to study and procrastinate. No, I actually got way too much to do in order to not to have time to procrastinate on anything. So busy, but we can't be so busy that we don't get into the Word and study, and that's why I recommend audiobooks, audio Bibles like this, the Word of Promise audio Bible. It's got the entire Bible. It's got just dramatic actors like Sean Austin and Stacy Keach, Gary Sinise, even Charlton Heston. No. Anyway, some really, really good voice actors in there. It's really a good series to listen to while you're in your car just driving around, just listening to the Word of God. It's a good way to sit and just kind of listen. And imagine that God is speaking it over you, because He is. Chapter 11. People were listening to the false prophets. We talked about that, They thought they were safe. The false prophets are like, you guys are safe. You're in a pot. You're a piece of meat in a pot, safe and sound from the outside world. And God's like, no. There's a fire underneath the pot. You're cooking. It's not good. And it's funny how it just flips the imagery around there. The people actually thought they were safe, like they were hiding in a pot. And God says, no, you're cooking right now. You're not being good. It's not going well. And while he's prophesying, things are happening around him. It amazes me. And I like this. Chapter 11, verse 20. That they may walk in my statutes and keep my ordinances and do. See, I'm going to give them one heart and put a new spirit in them. So God says, I'll take out a heart of stone, of flesh, and put in a heart of flesh. Take out of the heart of stone. That they may walk in my statutes and keep my ordinances. Then they will be my people, and I shall be their God. And he's talking about, obedience is a reaction to our salvation. It's not something we do in order to be saved. It's something we do because we are. Because God has already taken care of that. That's why we're with Him. Chapter 20, Son of man, you live in the midst of a rebellious house, who have eyes to see, but do not see, ears to hear, and do not hear, for they are rebellious people. I like that echoes Jesus, ears to hear, eyes to see. Whenever you read anything in the Old Testament, think about how would Jesus present this to the disciples or to the people? How would He preach this message? How would this relate to prophecies about Himself? Because He preached for 3 years, and He ministered for 3 years. He didn't just sit around and heal people. He talked, and He told them the Word of God. He taught the Word of God. And in the days of Jesus and the disciples, that was Genesis to Malachi. There was no Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John yet. And the messages that God, told the people, that the Son of God was presenting to the people, were all Genesis to Malachi. And it's a reminder to us to study this. Studying the Old Testament is important because it reminds us of what the things that He would have talked to His people about. And another one of those things that God tells Ezekiel to do, get your baggage together and sneak out take it out in the daytime and then sneak out at night. Talking about the deportations to Babylon being in the mornings and the evening. The siege is coming, be ready. The false prophets are referred to as foxes among the ruins, because the foxes are cunning and sharp, and you see that. I didn't mention this in the Song of Solomon. We talked about the Song of Solomon really briefly. There's actually a verse there that talks about they're talking to each other about getting rid of the little foxes before they destroy our vineyard. And I'm segmenting back to that real quick because I didn't say it then. I really wanted to point this out. Is how important that is in marriage and relationships, because foxes are deceptive creatures. They're in the biblical set when they're talking about it is how easy it is to fall into lies and deceptions and to not let things creep in between you and your partner and your spouse and your life and your friends. Not let those kinds of deceitful things creep in there to break apart what God is doing in you and planting in you. The same thing here, don't let the false prophets tell you otherwise. Jerusalem is falling. It's going to fall. Ezekiel's his mandate is to tell them that regardless whether they want to listen or not. And then you have the elders of Israel in chapter 14. And I love when God uses him despite nobody else listening to him at all. When he even says, if Noah and Daniel and Job were here, it'd be too late. It is too late. These righteous men, these patriarchs, this historical people that God's using. I mean, Daniel himself was in Babylon already. We talked about he already went to Babylon. God's already using him in leadership in Babylon. And Ezekiel, would have known about Daniel, may not have heard Daniel. Daniel may have actually listened to Ezekiel's prophecies, probably listened to Jeremiah. He was reading Jeremiah and the end of the book of Daniel. We'll get to that. And then the four judgments spoken of, parable of the vine in chapter 15. Remember the vines referencing the spiritual relationship with God, Israel's relationship, and as well as Christians' relationship with God, as comes up in the book of John, mostly, when he talked about the vine and the branches. Chapter 16 is one of my favorite chapters. It talks about, and there's an author, Francine Rivers. She has some really incredible novels that she bases off of this passage, as well as the book of Hosea and other things, just where God takes us abandoned and lost and takes us into his family, marries us, as it were, and he brings us into his fold. That's pretty cool. And I like chapter 16, verses 6, 7, and 8, is God's mercy, his grace, and his love. And I was going to read this real briefly here. It says, on the day you were born, your navel cord was not cut, nor washed, or water to clean you up, or salt to clean you up. No eye looked on you with pity, to have compassion on you. Rather, you were thrown into an open field, for you were abhorred on the day you were born. You were hated on the day you were born. You were left for dead on the day you were born. But I, God, passed by you and saw you squirming in your blood. And while you were in your blood, I said, live. Yes, while you were lying, abandoned, and bruised in your blood, I said, live. It's chapter 16, verse 6, probably one of my favorite verses in the entire Bible, because it just reminds us of where we are, squirming in whatever swamp we're sinking into. I pass by and pull you out. That's what I do. That's God's desire. And it says, I gave you all of these things as you grew up, and then I married you. I took you in, into my family. His grace, his love. But then the rest of the chapter is pretty horrible, because it talks about the sin of Israel as the wife of God, and how far away she got. In her pagan worship of false gods. But God's promise still stands, because verse 60 says, nevertheless, I will remember my covenant with you in the days of your youth, and I will establish an everlasting covenant with you. See, Israel still has a future purpose. We all still have a future purpose, no matter how messed up we get. And that's why you should look up the book Redeeming Love, and a couple other ones by Francine Rivers she does that are really, really good. Talk about his love and him pulling us out. And that was chapter 16. Chapter 17 and 18 talk about Babylon being the eagle coming, and even Egypt is not going to be spared and is going to turn its back on Israel. And then chapter 19 is a lamentation over Israel. And I put that, the Lord is lamenting over Israel. And that's the end of chapter 19. That's where we're going to stop. But I passed by, and I said, live. I want you to remember that. I want you to take that verse and just write it down, put it somewhere important to you, because if there's anything that I want you to get from listening to hours and hours of me talk about the Word of God, is that He wants you to live. And He wants you to live with Him. Blessings, my friend.